You made a decision an hour ago, a small one. Maybe you sent a message, said something in a conversation, or chose one option over another. And now, sitting quietly, your brain has pulled it back open, replaying it, rewording it, imagining how the other person read it, running through 3 different versions of what you should have said instead. Nobody asked you to do this. You didn't decide to do this. Your brain just started and now it won't stop. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not broken. But something specific is happening inside your brain when this starts, and it has almost nothing to do with the decision itself. Here's the question worth asking. Why do some people's brains do this and other people's don't? You probably know people who make a decision and simply move on. They don't replay it. They don't dissect it. It's done and they've already shifted to something else. And then there are people who can't leave a thought alone, who lie awake running scenarios, who replay a conversation from 3 days ago looking for signs they missed. Is it a personality flaw? A lack of confidence? A sign of weakness? Psychologists have been studying this pattern for decades now, and the answer is none of those things. Overthinking isn't a character defect. It's a specific pattern of brain activation with identifiable causes, and understanding those causes changes everything about how you see it. Because the brain that overthinks isn't a weak brain. In many cases, it's a brain that learned very early to scan for danger and never got the signal that it was safe to stop. To understand overthinking, you need to understand one specific part of your brain, the default mode network. This is a network of brain regions that activates when you're not focused on anything in particular, when you're idle, when you're waiting, when external demands drop away. In most people, the default mode network does something useful during these quiet moments. It processes recent experiences, consolidates memories, and runs light background problem solving. But in people who overthink, researchers have found something different. The default mode network activates more intensely and stays active longer, especially when the brain encounters unresolved situations or social uncertainty. A 2015 study published in the journal Psychological Science found that people with higher levels of rumination, the scientific term for repetitive, looping thought, show significantly more activity in the default mode network, particularly in areas linked to self-referential thinking and threat detection. In other words, the overthinking brain isn't randomly spiraling. It's doing something it genuinely believes is useful. It's scanning for a threat it hasn't fully resolved yet. And it keeps scanning until it finds one, or until exhaustion forces it to stop. That raises the next question. Why does one person's brain learn to do this, while another person's doesn't? Researchers who study childhood development have found a consistent pattern. Overthinking tends to develop in environments where unpredictability was the norm, not necessarily dramatic trauma. Sometimes it's subtler than that. A parent whose mood shifted without warning. A household where the rules weren't always clear. A social environment where getting something wrong had real, visible consequences. In those environments, the brain learns a very specific lesson. Paying close attention to every detail might help you avoid the next bad outcome. So it starts monitoring everything. Tone of voice, word choice, a pause that lasted slightly too long, a message that hasn't been replied to yet. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, an elevated state of environmental scanning that develops as a protective response to unpredictable conditions. The child who grew up needing to read the room constantly becomes the adult whose brain won't stop reading everything. The skill that helped them navigate difficulty gets stuck in the on position. And the brain, being the efficient pattern recognition machine it is, doesn't distinguish between genuine threats and ordinary daily decisions. It applies the same intense scrutiny to a text message that it once applied to figuring out whether a parent was in a bad mood. The context changed. The scanning never stopped. Here's something that surprises most people when they learn it. Overthinking often feels productive while it's happening. It feels like preparation, like thoroughness, like if you just think about it long enough, you'll arrive at the right answer and the discomfort will resolve. But research consistently shows the opposite is true. A 2003 study by psychologist Susan Nolen-Hoeksema, who spent her career studying rumination, found that people who ruminate extensively don't actually solve problems more effectively than people who don't. In fact, they solve them less effectively. Because the more you loop through the same material, the narrower your thinking becomes. You stop generating new perspectives and start reinforcing the most anxious interpretation of what already exists. The brain convinces itself it's working on the problem, but it's actually running the same emotional loop, dressed up as analysis. Nolen-Hoeksema described rumination as thinking that is self-focused, repetitive, and passive. You're not taking action. You're not gathering new information. You're just replaying what you already have from the same anxious angle. The feeling of productivity is part of what makes it so hard to stop. The brain believes it hasn't finished yet. It believes one more loop will finally resolve things. Here's the reframe that changes this entirely. The brain that overthinks isn't weak, indecisive, or neurotic. It's a brain running a protection program that was built for a genuinely more unpredictable environment, and it hasn't received a clear signal that the environment changed. The scanning, the replaying, the endless what-if loops, these aren't signs of failure. They're signs of a nervous system that once had very good reasons to stay alert and learned its lesson so thoroughly that it kept going long after the original conditions were gone. Think of it like a security system that was installed in a dangerous neighborhood, and then the neighborhood changed, and nobody sent the update. The system keeps running, keeps triggering, not because the threat is still there, but because the system was never told it wasn't. Some researchers now believe that many people who describe themselves as chronic overthinkers are not experiencing a cognitive disorder. They're experiencing a mismatch between a brain calibrated for one environment and a life being lived in a different one. The overthinking isn't the problem. The unresolved signal, the one that says stay alert, keep scanning, don't relax yet, is the thing still running underneath everything else. So the next time you catch your brain pulling a decision back open at midnight, replaying a conversation you thought you'd moved on from, scanning a message for meaning that may not even be there, it isn't evidence that you're weak. It isn't proof that something is wrong with you. It's a very old protection system still doing the job it was built to do in a world that asked for it a long time ago. The environment changed. The scanning never got the update.